Shut up and sit down.
I'm Carla Pfeffer, Director of Women's and Gender Studies and also an Associate Professor of Sociology and Women's and Gender Studies. I teach courses in sociology as well as courses in women's and gender studies. So some of the courses that I've taught here at the University of South Carolina include sex and gender, qualitative research methods, feminist methodologies and epistemologies, race, gender, class, and sexuality. My research interests largely focus on LGBTQ families, including transgender reproduction, transgender families, and same-sex families. So I have a couple of research streams. One of my research streams focused on individuals who are partnered with transgender men. So transgender men are people who are assigned female at birth, but who later in life come to live as men in the world or as trans men in the world. So I would talk with and conduct research with their self-identified cisgender women partners, meaning that the women partners are not transgender identified. One of my participants, her parents had really struggled with her identity as a lesbian when she first came out. They couldn't find it in their hearts to accept her. There had even been talk about whether or not they would disown her. When she began dating her transgender man partner and introduced her partner to her parents, they were thrilled because finally their daughter had met a nice young man, right? And they wouldn't have to think about her identity as a lesbian and what that would mean for their family, what it would mean for her life not to be in kind of a traditional recognized heterosexual relationship. They were thrilled about the fact that she was dating a man. However, they were horrified at the fact that she was dating a Black man. So it became very, very clear that often kind of these antipathies that folks hold, prejudices that people hold, they're motivated from often the same place. Again, that place of judgment, that place of getting a sense of our group is better than your group. This group is better than that group. So I could see sort of how the prejudices in this family shifted and transformed, that while she may find acceptance from her parents for one part of her identity or her partnership, she certainly wasn't going to find it for another part of her relationship. I think for me, it's been when I study same-sex families. So when I study same-sex families or I study transgender families, what I will often find is that many of the self-identified women partners in those couples, in those partnerships, are feminist identified. I don't find that surprising. But what I do find surprising is that if I take a look at who does the amount of household labor in their homes, who is expected to provide the vast majority of childcare or emotion work, what I find is that the more feminine identified partners in the couple are almost always the ones performing the bulk of that labor. So Arlie Hochschild refers to this as kind of a second shift for women, that you may be in the workforce, you go out, you do your paid participation in the labor field, right? But then you have to come home and you have to, unpaid, take care of the kids, clean the house, think about, oh, so-and-so is having a birthday, so I need to get a birthday card, right? Or plan a birthday party. That's the emotion work part of it. And we often fail to think about that. But in my research, I see these same or similar patterns recreated in same-sex families and sometimes in transgender families as well. I'm a strong believer in kind of researching what you know or what's familiar or that you have been a part of in some way. Not full insider status, but having some connection to communities that you research. I generally find it to be a strength. I'm somebody who self-identifies as a queer researcher, and I've been out as a lesbian or as queer self-identified since I was 16. So the same-sex families that I study, the transgender families that I studied are very close to my heart, right? I'm very connected to these communities. My most recent research is an international collaboration. It's a purely qualitative research project with a research team that is located in the United States, Italy, Australia, and the UK. The research participants that we've spoken with so far, their experiences run the gamut. So some of the folks that we've spoken with have become pregnant simply through having sex with a partner. So for example, some transgender men may be partnered with cisgender men, also known as non-transgender men, who have sperm, right? And they become pregnant, and sometimes they don't even know that they're pregnant when they're first pregnant. Or they may be partnered with transgender women who have not had bottom surgeries, for example, and again, become pregnant simply through being in a relationship, right? And doing the things you do when you're in a relationship. So for individuals who are in those circumstances, pregnancy or conception at least can be a lot easier. For some trans men, it's much tougher. So for some trans men, they may have to pause testosterone. They may have to think about having their eggs harvested, retrieved, fertilized, reimplanted embryos through IVF. That can be not just difficult, but very expensive and time-consuming as a process. So people really did kind of run the gamut in how easy or how difficult it was to get pregnant. They also kind of ran the gamut in terms of how difficult or easy it was being pregnant. So for some trans men that I interviewed, they talked about how people just perceived them on, say, the subway or a train as a fat guy, right? And so people wouldn't move over for them. They're 8-9 months pregnant and nobody's giving up a seat on the bus or a train, even though they're exhausted at the end of a long workday. They kind of became socially ignored as just fat guys on the train or the bus. Others talked about they felt like maybe they became more socially visible and were less often recognized as a man in the world as their bellies grew, especially if they still had chest tissue and that also grew at the same time. So they could talk about the experience of having their gender identity invalidated or their status as a man invalidated as their bellies grew with pregnancy. Some students will suggest that you have to look like a woman in order to be perceived as a woman in our culture. This is something that a lot of people think of as passing. So if you can see somebody who is, say, 6 feet tall, has a clear shadow of a beard, does that mean that if they wish to be called woman, they shouldn't have that right because clearly they look like a man? They do not pass as a woman. In my experience, the way I think about these categories, the way I think about the meaning of these ways of being in the world is that we can't rely on individual assessments, our own assessments of what we think a person is or a person should be. It does a disservice to people who are living their lives every day and experiencing tremendous amounts of social discrimination and prejudice and often outright hatred. And I also would encourage people to think about what it means and how far you want to go down a road where we suddenly say that the only identities that matter are the identities that you assign to people, right? If we think about historically in the world, who have been other people who have kind of been subject to policing social identity categories. Bearded women are one great example of this. So individuals who might have a condition that we now think of or that we now call polycystic ovarian syndrome, incredibly common. And it causes many women to have a condition known as hirsutism, which is having a lot of hair, especially on the face. Often these individuals weren't thought of as women at all, or were even depicted within circuses or kind of paraded around the country to kind of serve as human spectacles. So I want us to think about how far we want to go down the road before we think about how we want to other people. My thought is that individuals are authorities on their own lives, and I just want to get more of a sense of their stories and their experiences. Oh, I would say that we need to take a closer look at who gets to decide things in our culture. So something that I take a lot of a really strong focus on is whether or not people feel they have the authority to judge somebody as an other or worthy of certain rights or privileges. I want to get a sense of who the adjudicators are in our society, who gets to make decisions about right and wrong, belonging and not belonging. You're a member of my group or you're an outsider. I think it's by focusing on who gets to make those decisions and how we make those decisions that will really get someplace in thinking about social justice and social change. I think we go farther with those sorts of questions, questioning power and privilege and how it operates, than we do in just kind of always asking folks, why is this group marginal? Why is this group, I guess underrepresented? I think the question is, why are certain groups overprivileged, and how do they use that overprivilege in certain ways to shape society and structures?